What is cracking, guys? In this one I'm going to do a quick review on the fork controls on my Softail Street Bob, so let's get to it. So if you've seen my previous video, you would have seen that I changed the mid controls, which come stock on the 2019 Softail Street Bob, to fork controls, which left a hell of a dent in my wallet. Those fork controls cost about $700 Australian. So I'm going to talk a little bit as to why I went with fork controls over the mid controls. So the main reason why I went with fork controls is because I do a bit of distance riding, and I found on rides lasting longer than an hour and a half, my legs would cramp up. So with those mid controls, your legs sort of sat more on a right angle, as they sat more like that, instead of obviously with the fork controls out in front of you. And I'm not a particularly tall person, I'm only 5'9", so you could say that I'm vertically challenged. Granted, on those short rides, mid controls are awesome in and around town. They feel like you have a lot more maneuverability over the motorcycle as to what fork controls give you. The bike doesn't feel as easy to maneuver with these fork controls. It feels a little bit heavier in and around town. So I'd say that mid controls are more suited to town riding, as you have a better center of gravity over the motorcycle, and it just feels a hell of a lot easier to throw around. So the first thing that I've noticed with the fork controls is you get a hell of a lot more leverage on your brake pedal and your gear selector, and that's because of the angle of your foot positioning. So instead of pushing down on the brake pedal as to what you did with the mid controls, you're pushing forwards, and that gives you a hell of a lot better leverage on the rear brake pedal. Also with the gear selector, you have a lot more leverage with shifting, as your foot is on a angle which is pulling more in a backwards and up position, which, as I said, gives you more leverage on gear selecting. So that's a tick with the fork controls. Your braking feels better and your gear shifting feels better. I will say though, it feels a little bit more tricky trying to get the bike in neutral when it's hot with the fork controls. With the mid controls, it felt like the gearing was spaced out further, and that's just because of your foot positioning. So it just felt easier to find neutral with mid controls. Not a big issue. It's not as if it's extremely difficult to get it in neutral with forwards, but it doesn't feel as easy as what it did with mids. Another thing I've noticed with the fork controls is that your lean angle is reduced by a little bit. I don't know how much in degrees, but when I was going around the roundabout, I had a look down and the foot pegs were closer to the road than what they usually were. Not that they reduce your lean angle by a hell of a lot and that you're going to be scraping pegs, it's just something to keep in mind. Your lean angle is reduced a little bit. So if you're thinking about putting fork controls on your Softail Street Bob, another thing to consider is that you're going to be limited as to what air cleaner you go with. So if you can see my foot positioning there, you can see that my leg's resting against the stock air cleaner, whereas with the mid controls your foot positioning was more there and it didn't come in contact with the air cleaner at all. So I was really set on going with the Screaming Eagle heavy breather intake, and I've been told that that comes out a bit further than the stock air cleaner, which in turn will push your leg out a bit further. And I've been told by people who have fork controls and that Screaming Eagle heavy breather intake, saying it doesn't feel comfortable, it rests against your leg sticks out too far, so certainly don't go with it. So as I was saying, fork controls will limit your options as to what aftermarket air cleaner you should go with. I guess the big question is, are fork controls more comfortable than mid controls? And I gotta say, yes, I feel a hell of a lot more comfortable. I don't feel stretched out. As I said, I'm only 5'9", so it'd be a great option for someone who's 6 foot tall or so, as I found those mid controls pretty uncomfortable on those long rides. So yeah, for a taller person, fork controls would certainly be a better option. And something else which might be on your mind is, well, if you're saying that mid controls are better for around town riding, and you're saying that forward controls are better for distance riding, why didn't you go with the highway bars, which bolt onto your frame? And the main reason is I don't particularly like the look of them. Each to their own, it's just not my thing, it's not my style. I don't like metal bars hanging off the front of my bike. And aesthetically, I prefer the look of forward controls to mid controls. As I was saying before, it also gives you better leverage over the brake pedal and the gear selector, so that's another plus. But did I hate mid controls? No, they felt pretty comfortable around town, and as I was saying before, you had a lot more control over the bike around town as your centre of gravity was a lot better. Not that it feels difficult or particularly heavy with the forward controls, it just felt easier to handle with mid controls. So that's another thing to consider. So am I happy with purchasing forward controls considering they cost so much? I've got to say, yeah, 100%. I don't regret buying them, and I'd recommend them to anyone who's around my height or taller. People who are a fair bit shorter than me, you might feel a little bit too outstretched, and if you feel comfortable with mid controls, certainly don't go with forward controls. I think forward controls would be most suited to people who are 6 foot or taller, as I've seen a couple of photos of tall blokes on the Softail street blob, and it looks a bit funny. They look sort of cramped up and their legs are up here near their elbows. It kind of reminds me of that ridiculously tall bloke on The Simpsons who has that tiny car. But anyway, that's going to do it for the review. I know it was extremely short, but there were points that I think are important for anyone considering forward controls for their Softail street blob. As always, thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.